Chapter 27. A dull pounding pulsed through Vittoria's head. She moaned and attempted, unsuccessfully, to open her eyes. The air felt heavy with a smell she couldn't quite peg. Age? Decay? Earth? Pebbles ground into her arms and her back, wet and slippery. With all her might, she forced her eyes open. Several seconds passed before she comprehended that her eyes were, in fact, open. She saw only darkness at first, until a limp torch became visible in the distance. A tinkle of moving water came from far away, and a wave of the malodorous smell followed. The ache in her head intensified. She closed her eyes again and sought her memories. Where was she? How did she get here? The recollection returned sluggishly at first. Mare, pear, Eneko, the wench, Sonara, Romeo. Then pain in her head and total darkness. All at once, she remembered everything. Romeo had advanced on her, and that had been it. He'd easily toppled her. "Givers," she muttered. "They don't come here. At least you may be the first one." The voice reverberated as if she lay in a cave. Romeo. Vittoria's eyes flew open again. She canted her head to the left in the direction of his voice, only to find darkness. Her hands were bound in front of her by wiry rope that dug into the skin. Her eyes had adjusted to the darkness a bit more, enough to make out crude buttresses overhead. The arched supports were spaced out here and there, some crumbling after years of water erosion. Dark lines in the walls dribbled water. Any surface the light touched appeared to be slippery. Vittoria fought to keep her panic under control. The catacombs. This had to be the catacombs. Now the rebels had her. But if the rebels had her, why was Romeo here? Approaching footsteps rang in her ears. She blinked as a broad figure stepped closer. "I expected you to be a bit less frail," Romeo said. "You act like you're made of such strength when you're with my brother." Vittoria fought back a moan. Romeo chuckled, straightened, and moved away. While his focus was elsewhere, she peered around. Rough, uneven bookshelves had been chiseled into the stone walls. Scrolls and books and more scrolls lined every available space. She was in some sort of cavern, if these were the catacombs at all. But why wouldn't they be? Her head ached too much to think through it. A rickety desk sat in front of the closest bookshelf. Romeo stood behind it now, staring at her. "You're a fool, you know." "Why?" Vittoria croaked. She struggled to sit, then gave up. Her head throbbed too much. Her ankles were tied as tightly as her wrists. The grain of the rope rubbed against her skin and felt wet. Blood, likely. There would be no wiggling free. He lifted his hands, as if to encompass the bleak space. "Because you sought a dead witch at the behest of Hode, who is the cruelest witch of the century." "Sonara told you?" There was a smile in his voice when he said, "I know more than you think, Vittoria." "Are you Xavier?" she asked, recalling the brief conversation she'd had with Mateo about the elusive, possibly not even real, rebel leader. "No." "Then why are you in the catacombs with the rebels?" "It's a stroke of luck that I caught you tonight of all nights." A tinge of amusement filled the words, but his nonchalance seemed forced at best. Why wouldn't he answer her question? Vittoria grimaced against another wave of pain. She let out a long breath to relax the muscles in her shoulder, which also hurt. Had he hit her on the side of the head? The neck? How did she get here? Someone transported or carried her? The questions flooded her with every passing moment. She forced herself to set them aside and focus on what he'd said. "Tonight? Why tonight?" "Now that I have you, everything changes." He sounded stone cold. The lack of inflection sent a chill through her. "Because you are in my power, Mateo will not be able to win the final battle against me. How easy to distract him. To anger him. Not that his bleeding heart would have let him win anyway. Tonight, the throne is won, and it is won for us. Would you like something to drink?" Vittoria's throat ached with thirst after the long trek into Nechi, but she shook her head, then regretted it when pain bounced around her skull. What time was it? Time probably didn't exist down here in the belly of the earth. Had hours passed? He'd said, "It is one for us." Who did he work with? What was Mateo doing right now? "Tonight," she murmured. Her mind sped up slowly, absorbing the words too long after they were said. Panic tightened her chest, made it difficult to breathe. Now she understood. Now she saw what he must mean. Hode, is he dying? "Dead, or will be soon." "Mateo?" "Will shortly receive a message from me." He folded his hands behind his back and strolled toward her. In that message, I will inform him that the final battle will commence immediately. As the initiator of the Law of Rights, I get to choose the place of the final battle, although Balta declares the time. Vittoria swallowed, feeling cold. If nothing else, she had to keep him talking, get more information, buy time until she figured something out. Because she had to find Mateo, tell him that Romeo was something. A traitor? Working for the rebels? She didn't even know herself. Sonara, is she all right? Romeo paused, studying her with a dark expression. It cleared almost as quickly as it came. She's no concern of yours now. She is mine. She's my sister. Her son is... She is mine! His shout rippled through the empty corridors of the catacombs. Mine, mine, mine. Vittoria swallowed again, although her mouth and throat were bone dry. Romeo's flaring nostrils calmed. Fine. Vittoria winced. She's yours. I won't ask about her again. The pulsing in her temples subsided slightly. Romeo straightened his coat. See that you don't. Vittoria attempted to see more in the cavern, but the darkness was static now, pervasive. There was nothing else she'd be able to see without more light. She had a feeling there wasn't enough light for a reason. Romeo didn't want her to see. The vague shapes of dead candlesticks were barely discernible in the dark. A distant squeak sounded behind her, as if a tunnel led to, or past, this cavern. Rumors whispered that the catacombs were hiding places first created by the old ones who lived in Nechi long before witches ruled Alkarra alone, during the time of the mortals, before the Great Divide. When gods and goddesses reigned, the old ones had used magic to sculpt the catacombs and protect the mortals who hid from the wrath of the goddesses. The sea goddess, Prana, supposedly created the magic for these catacombs to protect the mortals and anger her sisters. Some of the catacombs stretched beyond Nechi's borders and under the ocean. Was she beneath the ocean right now? A chilling thought. Such ancient foundations couldn't be safe. How they stood now, she couldn't imagine. The magic would be ancient and likely faded. Would all of Nechi crumble when the catacombs fell? Canals must connect the caverns, if the constant sound of water meant anything, which meant she could escape this cavern, but to where? To stumble around in the depths of the earth, risking the rest of her life in the dark channels? She could wander forever, maybe drown, get lost, or go mad. No, she couldn't escape and wander on her own. She had to be brought out. Since you know why I'm here, Vittoria said when the silence stretched too long, will you tell me about Esperanza? She swallowed hard and tried to sound bitter. If you're going to kill me anyway, what does it matter? He laughed, a surprisingly lyrical sound. Why would you seek a dead woman's mysteries? It's not very landowner-like of you. We're all terrified of ghosts, aren't we? I confess, I thought your motivation was made up. Then again, Hode did love wasting other witches' time. Hode wanted me to come to the rebels and find the answer to a question. She monitored his placid face. He returned the same studious attention. What question? Deciding to throw caution to the wind, for Romeo surely wouldn't allow her to live, and if Hode was dead, then Mateo would be busy fighting for his life soon, she said, he wanted to know why she stayed, even when she wanted to leave. Romeo blinked. What were his exact words? The reverberating pain had ebbed to a dull, persistent throbbing, but it still made thinking difficult. Vittoria closed her eyes, even if the room was already so dark. It was easier to think back to that day without his eyes boring into her soul. She licked her dry lips. He said, why did Esperanza stay? Romeo's face split into a wide grin. You're a fool, Vittoria. A good-hearted fool. You see what he did now, don't you? A wild chase, an attempt to keep you busy and get you out of my way. If the rebels had you, then Mateo didn't, and that was all Hode wanted. He wanted me on the throne, not Mateo. Does he know you're a member of the rebels? He laughed. Per believes himself far cleverer than he really is. Do you think I'd still be alive if he even suspected? I've been hiding the secret for over a decade, Vittoria. Don't insult me. Vittoria's heart did a double whomp. She comprehended in that moment what she'd always known could be true, that all of this was nothing. She may have brought herself to her own end without Hode stepping in. Genius, really. Hode could, with very little effort, get rid of her and all the hope she brought to her witches. Romeo would ascend the throne unimpeded, except for one thing. Hode knew Romeo's secret. She recalled that day in Hode's office, her heart pounding with sudden understanding. The dry wheeze of Hode's voice scuttled back through her mind, the strain in his bitter, wrinkled face. "Because sometimes even the witches we trust the most will make fools of us," he had said. That hadn't been about Esperanza. Somehow, Hode had known Romeo was in league with the rebels, so he sent Vittoria down here to ask about Esperanza. Eventually, that would have led her to Romeo. Then she would have seen the truth, that Romeo had been betraying Hode all this time, playing both sides. Then she'd tell Mateo, who could use that information against his brother. Perhaps Hode even knew about Sonara. Wouldn't that explain his other comment? "You are the only witch who can reveal this truth." Only Vittoria could answer the question, because she knew Romeo's lover and had Mateo's trust. Mateo would believe Vittoria when she told him about Romeo, but wouldn't have trusted the same information from Hode. If he'd simply executed Romeo, Mateo would have taken the throne, and Hode didn't want that either. Her heart raced with the implications. If Romeo were in league with the rebels, what did it mean? What would the landowners say? Did it truly give Mateo an advantage? The thoughts made her breathless. It was almost unbelievable, except she had to believe it, because Romeo was in the catacombs with her right now. Everything felt scattered. She couldn't pull all her thoughts together into a cohesive puzzle in her aching mind, so she trusted her instinct and the vague plan that was slowly cobbling itself together. "You're not the leader of the rebels," she said to the sudden stillness. "At least, not yet. Xavier is still alive, isn't he? Your uncle, and now you're working with him." Romeo stilled. "That's your great plan to unite worker and landowner, isn't it? Xavier will draw the loyalty of the workers in Netchi, and you will bring the landowners. Maybe your agreement is that you rule as High Priest?" He didn't react, but even that told her she must be on the right track. "If that's true, then Xavier needs me, doesn't he? The workers might follow Xavier, but that's too great a risk to take when facing the landowner's magic. Workers will surely follow La Principessa, however. That's why you didn't kill me back at the wench. It's why you brought me here." Romeo shifted his weight. "You're no use to us dead, not yet anyway." "I'm no use to you silent either," she countered. "You want to destroy belief in La Principessa, but you're a fool if you do." "A fool? Hope is a great force. You, of all witches, should know that. We take away their giver of hope, and you have insurrection, rage, the desperate power of hopelessness. If you want a great insurrection on your hands, kill La Principessa, or the idea of her. Even if you keep me alive, but try to destroy the giver I have become, you'll be killed in the bloodshed that follows." His silence gave her a flimsy hope that she could get out of here. A tiny spark that meant she at least had his ear, so she might be able to talk herself out of this. She suspected he wouldn't ask any questions, so she kept going. "You need La Principessa to support Xavier, to throw her weight behind him. I suspect that while you're fighting Mateo, Xavier is supposed to rise to rally the workers. Because we both know that the workers are the real deciders here. The rebels are small in number compared to the guardians. Without workers flocking to your side, you'll fail immeasurably. And you know that, don't you?" Vittoria laughed, but it was mirthless. Romeo's treachery occurred to her in a whole new light. The landowners. He professed such admiration and love for landowners, but all along had been stabbing them in the back. He'd been planning to use the rebels to defeat them for how long now? A decade, had he said. How deep could this blackness extend into his being? He surely had no soul left. A true son of Hode. She swallowed and pressed on, warming to it. The pieces fell together in her mind. "Except the workers might not listen to Xavier, and that's a risk you cannot take. So you need La Principessa to call to them." Her voice hardened now. "But they won't follow if I don't say a word. So you don't need La Principessa dead. You need her vocal." Romeo advanced so quickly she almost didn't see him coming. One moment he stood behind his desk, the next he landed in front of her with a snarl contorting his handsome features. He stood over Vittoria, a hand to her throat. When he grasped her neck, fingers bruising her windpipe, she felt the darkness around him. Her heart thudded against her chest as she tried to gasp for air. "And yet," he whispered, his grip tightening, "you will speak." "Why should I?" she mouthed. Romeo sneered, and it curled like a cruel hiss around his lips. "Bring him." he shouted. A sharp cry issued from outside the cavern, but the sound was familiar. Fear coursed through her, so strong it gripped her like death. Him? No, it couldn't be. Romeo loosened his hold with a growl. The blood drained from Vittoria's face as she coughed, sucking in a lungful of air. You wouldn't, she whispered. Tori! Eneko's little voice cracked as he called her name from somewhere she couldn't see. Vittoria whipped her head toward the entrance of the cavern. Just beyond was a flickering torch. Then came a scuffle of sound and the shadow of a little body on the far wall. Eneko! Tori! He sobbed. Where are you? It's dark. I'm scared. Vittoria cried out when Romeo picked her up off the floor by her neck. He gripped her so tightly she couldn't breathe. Her head pulsed with a fresh wave of agony, and white stars exploded in front of her eyes. Because if you don't, Romeo whispered, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. He will die. You think Hode was terrifying. Just wait until you face my wrath. I am more terrifying than my pair, because nothing that he cared about could ever be good. I am what they made me to be, Vittoria, and now they will pay for their choices. Vittoria gasped as he shoved her to the ground. She landed on a rock on her back, wincing, and curled onto her side. Eneko had faded away, his keening cry disappearing into the dark. Tears clouded her eyes as Romeo stalked off, barking orders to witches she couldn't see. Then she heard manacles scraping across the ground. Eneko! She screamed. Eneko! A distant voice called. Tori! I will find you! I will come after you! Lock her up until I give you the command, Romeo said to two wraith-like witches. There's no one else in here while I'm gone. Romeo left the cavern amid a rustle of fabric. Sonara will never have anything to do with you after this, she shouted. Never. But he ignored her, and as her words echoed into the vast chambers of the catacombs, even Vittoria wondered if they were true. Sonara had never put Eneko first, and Romeo's hold on her was clearly absolute. Another sob ripped through her. The torch went out.